Hi everyone, this is Cindy with Mommy Leap Blog. Today I'm going to be telling you about our trip to the Kennedy Space Center. While we were in Florida, we were lucky enough to be able to visit the Kennedy Space Center, and I cannot tell you all just how much fun this trip was. This was probably the highlight of our trip to Florida because, I am a space nerd. My husband loves all things space and science, and my kids love it. It was just a fantastic time. When we originally planned our trip, we originally planned it so that we could be there for the SpaceX rocket launch. But unfortunately, the day that we had planned to be there, the rocket launch had to be postponed to the Sunday after our trip, which was the day that we were going to be back home in Tennessee. So we didn't get to see the rocket launch. That's one of the only bad things that I can say about our experience at Kennedy Space Center. We were pretty bummed out that we had to miss that. But it's out of our control. It's out of their control. Who knows why it was postponed. So when we got to the Kennedy Space Center, the first thing that we did was we went to the rocket garden. There's a huge rocket garden there right when you first walk into the Space Center, and it's all outdoors. So when you go, especially if you go in the summertime, I highly recommend that you do this first because it's right there next to the entrance and it's outside. And in the summertime, if you know anything about Florida, it's extremely hot down there in the summertime. So if you go down there, visit this first because you don't want to be out there in 90-degree heat looking at rockets. I mean, they're fascinating, but it's very hot. So yeah, you get to walk around this rocket garden, and this place is just full of history, and they do guided tours several times a day, and we got to go on one of these guided tours, and it was really fascinating because you get to hear the history of all of the rockets from the first rocket launch to the later ones, and you get to hear the story of how we had the race to the moon, and about the story about President Kennedy and his mission to get us to the moon just shortly after we launched our first American into space, and he was only in orbit for 15 minutes. Shortly after that, Kennedy made his famous "We choose to go to the moon" speech, and that was it. We were there on the moon less than 10 years later. So it was just a really neat thing to hear this tour guide and get this little dose of history, and it was just really, really fascinating. So after our tour of the rocket garden, we decided to get on the bus and go on the bus tour that takes you all around the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. And this is about a 45-minute tour, but it is well worth it. The buses are nice and comfortable and air conditioned. The bus drivers are great, and they're really good narrators. They tell you all about everywhere that you're going to visit. You get to see all of the places where the shuttles have launched, and you get to hear the history behind all of the shuttle launches and where they went and what their missions were. And another cool thing about the tour, I didn't realize this, but the Kennedy Space Center is actually on a nature preserve. And so while you are driving to all these places, you are driving around all of these canals and kind of swamp-like areas, and there are alligators all over the place. So not only do you get to see all of this history of space, but you get to see all of this nature and alligators and birds and just all kinds of cool stuff. We saw so many alligators. The whole time I was living in Florida, I never saw one alligator. I go to Kennedy Space Center, there's alligators all over the place down there. Who knew? That's where they are. So the bus takes you all around the Kennedy Space Center complex, and it's a really cool experience. While you are on breaks, where there's not much to see, they play videos that give you a little bit more of the history of the Space Center. And so it was just, this day is just full of history. Just it's really, really cool. So the bus drops you off at the Apollo Saturn V Center. And when you get to the center, you go into this auditorium, and this was just the coolest experience. The auditorium, you are looking down on the Mission Control Center from July 20th of 1969. If you all know that date, that's when the Apollo 8 launch was, when we launched our first mission to the moon. And this was just the coolest experience because you get to sit in front of the mission control. And so you're sitting in front of the mission control with all the lights lighting up, and then there's TVs above the mission control where they're broadcasting all of the television stations of their coverage of the shuttle launch. And it's just really neat. You get to experience the countdown and everyone's reactions to the launch. And I mean, I have to tell you, it was a very emotional experience because you really feel like you're there. It was just so cool. I mean, I really cannot describe just how amazing that was. And so after that's over, you get to go and walk around the Apollo V or the Apollo and Saturn V Center, and you get to see the Saturn V, and it is just this massive rocket that spans the entire building, and you get to walk under it and all around it and see what it was like, and you get to see, the astronaut uniforms, and it's just really cool to walk around there. And so then after we left there, we went back, we caught the bus and went back to the main visitors complex, and we went and had lunch. And the Kennedy Space Center, along with our admission, they were nice enough to give us $30 in meal vouchers, so that covered our food. We've had to pay maybe like an extra $5 for the rest of our meal. The meal to feed 4 of us was around $35, and the food was all right. I mean, it wasn't anything to write home about or anything, and the prices were comparable to your typical amusement park food prices. I mean, it is what it is. But here's a little insider tip that I did recognize while I was there eating, is there were moms around us. I guess they were, from the area visiting. They actually packed their lunches and brought them in and ate in the little restaurants. So in order to save money, you can pack your lunch and bring it in with you. So that's one good money saving tip. So if you are in the area, pack your lunch to save some money. I mean, it'd save you a good $30. So after lunch, we went to see an IMAX movie. We went and saw the story of the International Space Station. And this was narrated by Tom Cruise, and the movie is in 3D. And it tells a story about, the space stations, how they're built, and what it's like to live on the space station, and what the astronauts go through. And it was a really neat movie. It was really cool. It actually held my 3-year-old's attention, which I was really surprised because my 3-year-old is all over the place, won't sit still, but it held his attention. Now, my 8-year-old, on the other hand, I believe she got a hold of a bad pair of 3D glasses that kind of messed up her experience, so she was kind of not feeling it so much and ready to go. So after we left there, we treated them to the Angry Birds Space Encounter so they could kind of run and get some of that energy out from sitting still for so long. And they had a lot of fun with that. The Angry Birds Space Encounter, they have life-size, Angry Bird launch sets where you actually get to launch the Angry Birds out of these slingshots, and they have a huge mirror maze set up where the kids can run around this maze of mirrors. and they have a little laser game maze. I'm not really sure what that was. I didn't go in there, but a lot of the older kids seem to really be enjoying that. There were a lot of probably preteen to teens going through there and really having a blast with that. Now, after we left there, we went to the Atlantis Center, and let me tell you, this place was awesome. Oh my gosh, the Atlantis experience, that place is just way too cool. There is a huge the shuttle Atlantis is on display in the middle of this huge building, hanging from the building. And it's just so cool because the doors are open and you can see on the inside of the Atlantis, and it's just, oh god, it's amazing to see it. And then there's the Hubble on display, and what else? Oh gosh, there's tons and tons of interactive activities to go through there. And one of my kids' favorite is there's this big slide that you can go down, and I swear they went down that thing a million times. They were just running and running in loops going down the slide, and they had a blast with that. And there's also a shuttle launch experience that you can do, and my husband and I both did that. The kids weren't able to go. The 3-year-old was too small to go, and he was dying to go on it. The 8-year-old was big enough to go, but she wanted nothing to do with it. The thought of it terrified her. But it's not a scary ride at all. It's really not. It's really, really cool because you go in there and you're strapped in. You've got a seatbelt on, and it's just basically the seat vibrates a whole lot and shakes, and it gives you the feeling like you're in the shuttle launch, and it takes you from the shuttle launch itself until you get into orbit. And it's just a really cool experience. The astronaut who narrates it says that it's the closest experience to a shuttle launch that you can get without being in the shuttle launch itself. So while we were there were a few things that we didn't get to see, a few sites that we didn't get to see because it did storm while we were there. So unfortunately, we didn't get to do the astronaut encounter, so we didn't get to meet a real life astronaut. That was kind of disappointing because we did get stormed in while we were visiting the Atlantis Center. But on the positive side, we were stormed in at the Atlantis Center, so I can't really think of a better place to be stormed in. So, I mean, other than that, it was just a really, really cool experience, and I highly recommend you at least visit this place once because there is just so much to see. There's so much to learn. It's just a huge lesson in history and science and space. I mean, you can't ask for a better place to visit. And I just really want to thank the Kennedy Space Center for hosting our family. We had so much fun. And if you want more information about the Space Center, just visit their website and keep an eye on the rocket launches. There aren't any shuttle launches going on because we just know NASA's lost funding in the USA, and so we don't have any coming up. But they do still have rocket launches from the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral. So if you time your visit right, and if you're lucky enough to not be down there when the rocket launch is delayed, you might actually get to see a rocket launch, which that would be very, very cool. Hopefully one day we'll be able to get back down there and actually see one. So I'll sign off for now, and be sure to visit my website and follow me on Facebook for more updates, and I'll see you all soon.